Hello friends, welcome to TNV Academy. In this session, we will discuss about Clause 7, Clause 8, Clause 9 and Clause 10 of ISO 45000:2018, which is Occupational Health and Safety Management System. So, let's begin. We are going to talk about Clause 7 support of ISO 45001:2018. Clause 7 of ISO 45001 provides guidance on the support required to ensure that occupational health and safety management system is functioning effectively. The Clause 7 support comes under planning component of the PDCA cycle. Clause 7 support of ISO 45001:2018 talks about the support required by the organization and the workforce to establish and implement its occupational health and safety objectives. The support is provided in the form of resources, competence, awareness, communication, and documented information. This clause is divided into 5 subclauses, and some of them are further divided into their respective subclauses. The 5 subclauses are Subclause 7.1 Resources, Subclause 7.2 Competence, Subclause 7.3 Awareness, Subclause 7.4 Communication, Subclause 7.5 Documented Information. We will discuss these subclauses one by one in detail. Let's start with Subclause 7.1 Resources of ISO 45001:2018, that is Occupational Health and Safety Management System. The Subclause 7.1 Resources states that the organization has to determine and provide the necessary resources which are needed for the establishment, implementation, maintenance, and continual improvement of the occupational health and safety management system. It is the responsibility of the top management to establish or allocate the resources needed to perform the actions relevant to organization's occupational health and safety policy and objectives. As part of identifying resources, the organization needs to look at the information produced in Clause 6 to acknowledge the risk, opportunities, and resulting objectives. While allocating the resources, top management has to keep in mind the current and also the future needs of the organization, because any absence or diminution can be a limitation in the effectiveness of occupational health and safety management system. Resources should be provided in a timely and efficient manner. Resources should be provided in a timely and efficient manner. Examples of resources can be human, which can be workers, staff, fire department, etc. Infrastructure, under this plant, equipment, communication systems, etc. Technology, finance. After allocating or establishing the resources, the top management has to ensure effective implementation of these resources to achieve the objectives set by the organization. During the course of action, there can be breakdown of machinery or other problems can come up. So the top management is also responsible for maintenance of the resources. Let us understand maintenance of resources with the help of a simple example. Suppose a production manager has resigned from his job. The top management will have to deploy another person from within the organization or hire a new production manager to fill in the respective position. That position cannot remain vacant for longer time duration because absence of manager will hamper the effectiveness of the occupational health and safety management system of the organization. So it's a responsibility of the top management of the organization to provide relevant resource to maintain the effectiveness of occupational health and safety management system and to meet the requirement of the standard. At last, the top management must find new ways and methods to continually improve the occupational health and safety management system using these resources. During the audit, the auditor may check that whether or not the top management is capable enough or is providing, implementing, maintaining, and ensuring continual improvement relevant to occupational health and safety management system of the organization. The ISO standard does not demand documented information for this Clause 7.1 resource. but the top management of the organization can maintain the records relating to fulfillment of requirements of Clause 7.1 resources of ISO 45001:2018. Now, let's discuss second clause of Clause 7 support, which is Clause 7.2 competence. Competence can be defined as the quality or state of having sufficient knowledge, judgment, skill, or strength as for a particular duty or in a particular respect. And because our focus is ISO 45001:2018 Occupational Health and Safety Management System, that particular duty will be relevant to ISO 45001:2018. The top management of the organization has to determine the necessary components which the worker must possess that affects or can affect their occupational health and safety performance. It means that the top management has to develop competency matrices linked to an employee's job description. Some organizations may have generic job descriptions, allowing more specific competency requirements to be controlled under separate organizational processes and procedures. However, the competency requirements are managed. They will need to be documented in such a manner as to be easily retrievable for audit purposes. The top management has to further ensure that the workers under an organization's control are competent enough to identify occupational health and safety risks and opportunities and the hazards based on appropriate education, training, or experience. The workers must have the capability or they must be competent enough not only to identify the hazards and dangers proactively but also to safeguard themselves and others from this. The workers must have the capability or they must be competent enough not only to identify the hazards and dangers proactively but also to safeguard themselves and others from that hazardous situation. This kind of capability depends upon past experience, skill level, training, qualifications, and education. The top management of the organization must establish criteria or guidelines by which they can evaluate the level of competency of various staffs and employees against changing occupational health and safety needs of the organization. The top management is required to check for evidences that all workers and staff members who work under organizations' direct or indirect control are competent, and the evidences to support that must be maintained as documented information in accordance to clause 7.5 of this standard. The third point of the requirement states that the top management of the organization must take action as deemed appropriate to acquire and maintain the necessary competence and also evaluate the effectiveness of the actions taken. If the workers are deemed not to be competent, the organization is required to take actions in order to acquire the necessary competence. These actions may include refresher or remedial training, recruitment of additional personnel, or hiring or contracting of external expertise. Training is provided by the organization to the staff and workers to make them competent enough so that they can meet the requirement of the competence set by the top management. Training should never be seen as burden or waste of resources. Instead, it should be used as an opportunity to develop and acquire the skills by the workers so that they help in the contribution of successful implementation of occupational health and safety management system. The actions taken to raise competence to the required level need to be evaluated for effectiveness by means of the following mechanisms: interlocution of the workers on their understanding of their competence to perform the relevant tasks following the prescribed training, assessment of competence of the workers by observing them undertake the relevant task following the prescribed training, peer review or supervision following the required training. The fourth requirement of clause 7.2 competence of ISO 45001:2018 Occupational Health and Safety Management System asks the organization to retain documented information as evidence or proof of competence. Retention of documents means that the top management has to keep records of the actions taken to fulfill the requirement of the standard. The top management of the organization has to retain and update the documents wherever the requirement asks them to do so, and the top management can retain the documents wherever it deems necessary. And the note in the requirement states that applicable actions can include, for example, the provision of training to, the mentoring of, or the reassignment of currently employed persons, or the hiring or contracting of competent persons. That means documented information has to be retained relevant to actions taken by the top management. Now, let's discuss clause 7.3, awareness. The requirement of the standard states that the worker must be made aware of the occupational health and safety policy and occupational health and safety objectives of the organization. If the workers won't have any idea regarding the occupational health and safety policy and objectives of the organization, then how will they contribute their part in making the occupational health and safety management system more effective? The workers must also be made aware about the methods or the ways by which they can make the occupational health and safety more effective, and they must also be told about the benefits of effective, improved occupational health and safety management system. If they know about the benefits of occupational health and safety, then it will be easy for the organization to make them follow. The workers must be made aware about the implications and potential consequences that the workers and the organization will face if the workers do not conform to the requirement of the occupational health and safety management system of the organization. They should also be made aware regarding the incidents and the outcomes of the investigation which are relevant to them. Doing this will help them understand that why an incident happens and how it can be prevented from happening again. It will help them realize that are they doing the same mistake or are the resources available to them to prevent it from happening again. The requirement asks the top management of the organization that the workers must be made aware regarding the hazards and occupational health and safety risk which the workers can face while performing actions for relevant tasks. The requirement also asks the top management of the organization to train the workers in the skill of identifying threats proactively, and also the workers must be able to remove themselves from those threats or dangers. The workers must be made aware about the arrangements which are put in place in order to protect the workers from undue consequences like termination of contract or fear of legal actions. So friends, it is the end of clause 7.3, awareness of ISO 45001-2018. Next is clause 7.4, communication of ISO 45001-2018. The clause 7.4 of ISO 45001-2018 Occupational Health and Safety Management System talks about communication aspects of an organization. The clause is divided into three subclauses which are Subclause 7.4.1 General, Subclause 7.4.2 Internal Communication, Subclause 7.4.3 External Communication. Let us discuss the requirement of Subclause 7.4.1 General in detail. The requirement says it is the responsibility of the top management to establish, implement, and maintain the process or processes that will be needed for the internal and external communications, which are relevant to the occupational health and safety management system. They have to put an effective and efficient system in place for the communication needs of the organization. Here, communication signifies the smooth flow of information from a department or level to another. Any delay, misinformation, or miscommunication can be dangerous. For example, as it has happened on many occasions that locals or the tourists do enjoy the scenery near a dam. Sometimes they enjoy swimming or photographing in the river, and all of a sudden the gates of the dam starts flooding without any warning, and because of lack of communication between the authority and locals, the lives are lost. So, what the dam authority can do to prevent this from happening? Well, the dam authority can inform the locals. They can do announcement or use sirens, or they can use lights of different colors to signal when the gate will open. The top management has to decide that for what purpose they will use communication, or in short, what they will communicate. Because we are discussing ISO 45001-2018 Occupational Health and Safety Management System, the communication will be related to the safety of health and lives of the people. So the communication will be used for safety alerts, hazards, industry safety information, newsletters, etc., which are relevant for the workers regarding the occupational health and safety policy of the organization. Next is when to communicate. For general and regular information, communication can be done daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, depending on the nature of the information, which has to be decided by the top management. Or when the alert, urgent flow of information is needed from or to the authority of the organization. Next is with whom to communicate. It will depend upon the nature of information and for whom it is relevant. Communication can be done between different departments and levels of staff, interested parties, contractors, local authority, local population, media, compliance authorities and bodies, emergency response services, delivery service staff, utility service staff, etc. Now, how to communicate? Communication can be done via meetings, training courses, site inductions, briefings, focus groups, emails, billboard, leaflets, local newspaper, media, etc. Emergency modes may include sirens, announcement on loudspeakers, or light signals. There is a probability that the workers, staff, or the local population is not adequately educated. They might not understand any information which is not communicated to them in local language. Some might be illiterate, so simple language should be used. Don't assume everybody in the organization can read and write. Include pictures and diagrams in your occupational health and safety communications. Different cultures, languages, disability, genders, age groups should be considered while communicating the information. However, the organization decides to communicate, it needs to be consistent in its delivery and methodology to achieve homogeneous and logical results. Organization should also consider the views and suggestions of the external parties involved. The top management of the organization has also to take into account the legal requirement like laws and regulations set by the government or local authority and any other requirements like implementation of ISO 45001 itself or any other standards. The information which is generated by the organization has to be reliable, or else reliability of the information and the organization will be questioned. The organization has to respond to relevant communications on its occupational health and safety management system. Most importantly, questions asked by media or local authority after a few duration of an incident, if answered correctly, it can save lives and minimize the losses. Now let us discuss the requirement of clause 7.4.2, internal communication of ISO 45001-2018 to the occupational health and safety management system among various levels and functions of the organization. The clause requires the organization to have a system in place of communication that ensures that those within the organization are kept informed regarding the occupational health and safety issues associated with the organization's operations, and that communication from internal interested party is received and handled according to the established process. The requirement does not specify that what information will be considered relevant to whom or what are the various functions and levels of the organization. This gives a leeway or a free hand to the top management of the organization in deciding what information is relevant to them and what are various level and department of the organization. It is because every organization is different in its own way based on location, size, product and services, etc. They also have different context and scope. For successful implementation of Clause 7.4.2, internal communication, organization needs to have the top management's commitment to its occupational health and safety management system. There has to be a defined and easy system for raising concerns or making suggestions without fear of any consequences from the top management. The employees and the relevant party needs to have a clear understanding about occupational health and safety policy and objectives and how it is disseminated throughout the organization. Some methods of internal communications could include memos, presentations, notice boards, suggestion box, meetings on management, safety, quality, reviews, etc. Training courses, site inductions, briefings, email, faxes, company intranet, company web pages. Now, let us discuss subclause 7.4.3 External Communication. The clause says that the organization is required externally communicate information. The clause says that the organization is required to externally communicate information which is relevant to the occupational health and safety management system as established by the organization's communication process or processes and while taking into account its legal requirement and other requirements. Legal requirement means requirement which is required to fulfill by the law. Other requirement means requirement like ISO standards or others. Now, we will discuss clause 7.5 documented information of ISO 45001-2018 of Occupational Health and Safety Management System. This clause is further divided into three subclauses, which are Subclause 7.5.1 General, Subclause 7.5.2 Creating and Updating, Subclause 7.5.3 Control of Documented Information. Let us start with Subclause 7.5.1 General, which states that the organization's occupational health and safety management system must include documented information which is required by ISO 45001-2018. For example, Clause 4.3 Scope of the Occupational Health and Safety Management System of ISO 45001-2018 asks for documented information to be maintained by the organization. The clause also asks that organization's occupational health and safety management system to include documented information determined by the organization as being necessary for the effectiveness of the occupational health and safety management system. For example, Clause 4.1 Context of the organization does not necessarily ask for documented information, but if the top management of the organization feels obliged to include documented information, then they can. The clause under a note states that the extent of documented information for an occupational health and safety management system can differ from one organization to other. This difference may arise due to the size of the organization and its type of activities, processes, products, and services, the need to demonstrate fulfillment of legal requirements and other requirements, the complexity of processes and their interactions, the competence of workers. The subclause 7.5.2 Creating and Updating states that when a documented information is being created and updated, the top management of the organization is required to ensure appropriate identification and description of the documented information. Identification and description can include a title, date, author's name, or a reference number. The top management of the organization has to also ensure that the format and the media of the documented information is appropriate. Examples of format will include language, software version, graphics, etc. And examples of media will include paper, electronic, etc. The requirement also asks the top management of the organization to review and approve the documented information for suitability and adequacy, including its identification, description and format, when the documented information is created and updated. The subclause 7.5.3 Control of Documented Information states that the top management of the organization has to ensure control of the documented information which is relevant to the occupational health and safety management system in order to ensure that the documented information is available and suitable for use, where and when it is needed for use. It also asks the top management to ensure that the documented information is adequately protected from loss of confidentiality, improper use, or loss of integrity. To ensure the control of documented information, the organization must address the following activities as applicable: distribution, access, retrieval, and use, storage and preservation, including preservation of legibility, control of changes, example, version control, retention and disposition, documented information of external origin, which is determined by the top management of the organization to be necessary for the planning and operation of the occupational health and safety management system, shall be identified as appropriate and controlled. The subclause under Note 1 suggests that access can imply a decision regarding the permission to view the documented information only, or the permission and authority to view and change the documented information. The subclause under Note 2 implies that access to relevant documented information includes access by workers and, where they exist, workers' representatives. So friends, this is the end of Clause 7 support of ISO 45001-2018 of Occupational Health and Safety Management System. Now we will discuss Clause 8 operation of ISO 45001-2018, that is Occupational Health and Safety Management System. Operations can be defined as performance of a practical work or of something involving the practical application of principles or processes. Clause 8 Operation provides a guidance on the operational planning and control requirements relevant to the occupational health and safety management system. Clause 8 deals with ensuring processes and methods which control activities that are designed to ensure workers are protected from harm. Having established the methodology of hazard identification in Clause 6, the organization will use the hierarchy of controls determined to eliminate or reduce hazards to the lowest practicable risk level. The clause is divided into two subclauses: Clause 8.1 Operational Planning and Control and Clause 8.2 Emergency Preparedness and Response. And these clauses are further divided into more subclauses. So let's start with Clause 8.1 Operational Planning and Control. Subclause 8.1 General states that the organization has to plan, implement, control, and maintain the processes needed to meet the requirement of occupational health and safety management system and to implement the actions determined in Clause 6 by Point A. By establishing criteria for the processes. Point B. By implementing control of the processes in accordance with the criteria. Point C. By maintaining and retaining documented information to the extent necessary to have confidence that the processes have been carried out as planned. Point D. By adapting work to workers. These requirements talk about criteria. However, ISO 45001-2018 does not state specific criteria for occupational health and safety performance, nor it is prescriptive to the design of an occupational health and safety management system. At multi-employer workplaces, the organization shall coordinate the relevant parts of the occupational health and safety management system with the other organizations. By looking at Annexure A 8.1.1, a clearer understanding of the type of criteria of the standard is not specified. Examples of operational control of the processes includes procedures and systems of work, competence of workers, prevention, or predictive maintenance and inspection programs, specifications for the procurement of goods and services, application of legal requirement and other requirements, or manufacturer's instructions for equipment, engineering and administrative control, adapting work to workers, for example, defining or redefining processes and working environment, using ergonomic approaches when designing new or modifying workplaces, equipment, etc. Coming to subclause 8.1.2, eliminating hazards and reducing occupational health and safety risks. The requirement of the ISO standard states that the organization has to establish, implement, and maintain a process or processes for the elimination of hazards and reduction of occupational health and safety risks using the following hierarchy of controls. Point A. Eliminate the hazard. Point B. Substitute with less hazardous processes, operations, materials, or equipment. Point C. Using engineering controls and reorganization of work. Point D. Use administrative controls, including training. Point E. Use adequate personnel protective equipment. The following examples illustrate the application of the hierarchy of controls. Measures which will help in implementing the requirement of the standard are elimination. Elimination involves removing the hazard from the workplace so that no employee is subjected to the risk like stop using hazardous chemicals, eliminating monotonous work, etc. Substitution. This involves replacing hazards with less hazardous ones, combating occupational health and safety risks at source, adapting to technical progress. Engineering controls. Engineering controls can be highly effective in protecting workers from hazard at their source, implementing collective protective measures such as isolation, machine guarding, ventilation, noise reduction, etc. Reorganization of work. Examples will be isolating people from hazard, reorganizing work to avoid unhealthy hours of work. Administrative control will include training, giving appropriate instruction to workers, lockout, processes, induction, forklift driving licenses, etc. The clause under a note states that in many countries, legal requirement and other requirements include the requirement that personal protective equipment PPE is provided at no cost to workers. You can refer to Annexure A, which provides guidance on the use of ISO 45001-2018 standard for more detail. Now, coming to subclause 8.1.3, Management of Change. The clause states that the organization must establish a process or processes for the implementation and control of planned, temporary, and permanent changes that impact occupational health and safety performance. Introducing change to products, services, processes, and resources introduces risk if established control measures are no longer sufficient. Changes need to be planned and managed to effectively mitigate any hazards. Changes can not only be related to tangible items such as new equipment, machinery, technology, tools, materials, work sites, facilities, work conditions, etc., but also less discernible items such as new working practices, work procedures and instructions, legislation, industry guidance, best practice, employees, workforces, training, shift patterns, etc. The organization shall review the consequences of unintended changes, taking action to mitigate any adverse effects as necessary. The standard under a note states that changes can result in either risk or opportunities or both. Coming to subclause 8.1.4, Procurement. The subclause 8.1.4.1 General states that the organization is required to establish, implement, and maintain a process or processes to control the procurement of products and services in order to ensure their conformity to its occupational health and safety management system. Procurement processes should be used to control potential hazards and reduce operational health and safety risk associated with the purchase and introduction of new products, hazardous chemicals, raw materials, equipment, ancillary services into the workplace. The process should be used to address the needs of consultation and communication on the procurement process with interested parties such as workers, contractors, and visitors. The process should also address the need for consultation and communication on the procurement process with interested parties such as workers, contractors, and visitors. The requirement of subclause 8.1.4.2 contractors states that the organization shall coordinate its procurement process or processes with its contractors in order to identify hazards and to assess and control the occupational health and safety risks arising from the contractor's activities and operations that impact the organization. From the organization's activities and operations that impact the contractor's workers. From the contractor's activities and operations that impact other interested parties in the workplace. Procurement of a contractor is less to do with the services provided but more to do with the management of the contractors. Some contractors might possess specialized knowledge, skills, means, and methods. The organization shall ensure that the requirement of its occupational health and safety management system are met by contractors and their workers. The organization's procurement process or processes must define and apply occupational health and safety criteria for the selection of contractor. A note suggests that it will be helpful to include the occupational health and safety criteria for the selection of contractors in the contractual documents. The requirement of subclause 8.1.4.2 contractors states that the organization shall coordinate its procurement process or processes with its contractors in order to identify hazards and to assess and control the occupational health and safety risks arising from the contractor's activities and operations that impact the organization. From the organization's activities and operations that impact the contractor's workers. From the contractor's activities and operations that impact other interested parties in the workplace. Procurement of a contractor is less to do with the services provided but more to do with the management of the contractors. Some contractors might possess specialized knowledge, skills, means, and methods. The organization shall ensure that the requirement of its occupational health and safety management system are met by contractors and their workers. The organization's procurement process or processes must define and apply occupational health and safety criteria for the selection of contractor. A note suggests that it will be helpful to include the occupational health and safety criteria for the selection of contractors in the contractual documents. Now, we will discuss subclause 8.1.4.3 Outsourcing. Outsourcing is the business practice of hiring a party outside a company to perform services or create goods that were traditionally performed in-house by the company's own employees and staff. The requirement of clause states that the organization has to ensure that outsourced functions and processes are controlled. The organization shall also ensure that its outsourcing arrangements are consistent with legal requirements and other requirements and with achieving the intended outcomes of the occupational health and safety management system. The type and degree of control to be applied to these functions and processes shall be defined within the occupational health and safety management system. A note under the requirement states that coordination with external providers can assist an organization to address any impact that outsourcing has on its occupational health and safety performance. Now, we will discuss clause 8.2 Emergency Preparedness and Response. This clause provides guidance on the preparedness and response action plans needed to tackle emergency situations relevant to occupational health and safety management system. According to the requirement, the organization has to establish, implement, and maintain a process or processes needed to prepare for and respond to potentially emergency situations, as identified in Subclass 6.1.2.1. First of all, the top management of the organization has to identify in advance about the possibilities of situations which can occur. Once the situations are identified, then the top management is required to establish a planned response to identified emergency situations, including the provision of first aid. After establishing the response, the organization has to provide training for the planned response so that when the situation arises, the worker knows their roles and responsibilities. The top management must periodically test and exercise the planned response capability and document them. The performance of the response team has to be evaluated, and as necessary, the planned response should be revised, including after testing and, in particular, after the occurrence of emergency situations. The shortcomings should be analyzed or new response order should be planned accordingly. The roles, responsibilities, the planned response must be communicated effectively, and the top management must provide relevant information to all workers on their duties and responsibilities. The emergency preparedness and response plan must communicate relevant information to contractors, visitors, emergency response services, government authorities, and as appropriate, the local community. The top management has to take into account the needs and capabilities of all relevant interested parties and ensuring their involvement, as appropriate, in the development of the planned response. The organization shall maintain and retain documented information on the processes and on the plans for responding to potential emergency situations. So friends, it is the end of Clause 8 Operation of ISO 45001-2018 Occupational Health and Safety Management System. We will now discuss Clause 9 Performance Evaluation. Clause 9 comes under check component of the PDCA cycle. This clause provides guidance on the evaluation of the various performance indicators set by the organization in order to accomplish the occupational health and safety objectives. The Clause 9 performance evaluation is divided into three subclauses, which are Subclause 9.1 Monitoring, Measurement, Analysis, and Performance Evaluation. Subclause 9.2 Internal Audit. Subclause 9.3 Management Review. And these clauses are further divided into more subclauses. So let's begin with Clause 9.1 Monitoring, Measurement, Analysis, and Performance Evaluation. The subclause 9.1.1 General states that the organization is required to establish, implement, and maintain a process or set of processes for monitoring, measurement, analysis, and performance evaluation. First, the organization has to identify that what it needs to monitor and measure, and this monitoring and measurement must include: first, the extent to which legal requirements and other requirements are fulfilled. Second, its activities and operations related to identified hazards, risks, and opportunities. Third, progress towards achievement of the organization's occupational health and safety objectives. Fourth, effectiveness of operational and other controls. After identification, the organization has to put in place the methods for monitoring, measurement, analysis, and performance evaluation as applicable to ensure valid results. The organization has to determine the criteria against which organization's occupational health and safety performance will be evaluated. To measure the criteria, indicators are used. The top management of the organization has also to determine when the monitoring and measuring shall be performed and when the results from monitoring and measurement shall be analyzed, evaluated, and communicated. The organization must evaluate the occupational health and safety performance and determine the effectiveness of the occupational health and safety management system. The organization shall ensure that monitoring and measuring equipment is calibrated or verified as applicable and is used and maintained as appropriate. The clause under a note states that there can be legal requirements or other requirements, example, national or international standards concerning the calibration or verification of monitoring and measuring equipment. The requirement of the standard asks the organization to retain appropriate documented information. These documented information will act as evidence of the result of monitoring, measurement, analysis, and performance evaluation. The top management of the organization must also retain appropriate documentation on the maintenance, calibration, or verification of measuring equipment. Coming to clause 9.1.2, evaluation of compliance. The subclause 9.1.2 states that the organization is required to establish, implement, and maintain a process or set of processes for evaluating compliance with legal requirement and other requirements referred to clause 6.1.3. Also, the organization has to identify the frequency and methods for the evaluation of compliance, legal and safety relevant to occupational health and safety of the workers in the organization. After that, the organization has to evaluate the compliance and take actions if needed. Refer to clause 10.2. Because it is not necessary that the result of compliance evaluation will be satisfactory. If the compliance is lacking, then the organization has to take action like why compliance is lacking or where it is lacking. And if procedure is full of fault, then the organization has to amend the procedure. The organization is also required to maintain knowledge and understanding of its compliance status and legal requirement and other requirement. And then, finally, retain documented information of the compliance evaluation results because these documented information will act as evidence during the audit. Coming to clause 9.2, internal audit. The clause states that the organization must conduct internal audits at planned intervals to provide information on whether the occupational health and safety management system conforms to the requirements set by the organization for its occupational health and safety management system, including the occupational health and safety policy and occupational health and safety objectives, and the requirement of ISO 45001. Also, the audit allows the organization to identify if the occupational health and safety management system is implemented and maintained effectively. The extent of the audit program should be based on the complexity and the level of maturity of the occupational health and safety management system. Coming to subclause 9.2.2, Internal Audit Program. The subclause 9.2.2 states that the organization must plan, establish, implement, and maintain an audit program or programs including the frequency, methods, responsibilities, consultation, planning requirements, and reporting, which shall take into consideration the importance of the processes concerned and the results of previous audits. The organization is required to define the audit criteria and scope for each audit before the start of audit. Also, the organization must select auditors and conduct audits to ensure objectivity and impartiality of the audit process. The internal auditor must audit separate function from their normal assigned duties, or the organization can also use external people for this function. The top management of the organization has to ensure that the results of the audit are reported to relevant managers. Ensure that relevant audit results are reported to workers and where they exist, workers' representatives, and other relevant interested parties. The organization must take action to address non-conformities and continually improve its occupational health and safety performance. Refer to clause 10. The organization has to retain documented information as evidence of the implementation of the audit program and the audit results. The clause under a note states that for more information on auditing and the competence of auditors, refer to ISO 19011. Coming to clause 9.3, management review. The clause says that the top management shall review the organization's occupational health and safety management system at planned intervals to ensure its continuing suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness. The management review shall include consideration of the status of actions from previous management reviews, which means the organization has to look back and find out what actions were required to be taken in previous management reviews and has the organization taken any action against the point mentioned in previous management review. The responsible authority is supposed to submit their report and the organization is supposed to review these reports. The management must also periodically review the changes in external and internal issues that are relevant to the occupational health and safety management system, which includes the needs and expectation of interested parties, fulfillment of legal requirement and other requirements, and the risk and opportunities. The management has to periodically review the extent to which the occupational health and safety policy and occupational health and safety objectives have been met, which means the organization has to review how far the occupational health and safety policy was implemented, how the objectives have behaved, and what results have been achieved. The management review must also include consideration of information on the occupational health and safety performance, including trends in incidents, non-conformities, corrective actions, and continual improvement, monitoring and measurement results, results of evaluation of compliance with legal requirements and other requirements, audit results, consultation and participation of workers, and risk and opportunities. The management review must include consideration of adequacy of resources for maintaining an effective occupational health and safety management system, whether the organization has to add more resources so that occupational health and safety management system becomes more effective. The management review is required to include consideration of relevant communications with interested parties. And finally, the management review must consider opportunities for continual improvement. The outputs of the management review must include decisions related to the continuing suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness of the occupational health and safety management system in achieving its intended outcomes, continual improvement opportunities, any need for changes to the occupational health and safety management system, resources needed, actions if needed, opportunities to improve integration of the occupational health and safety management system with other business processes, any implications for the strategic direction of the organization. Top management has to communicate the relevant outputs of the management reviews to the workers and where they exist, worker representatives. Refer to clause 7.4. The organization shall retain documented information as evidence of the results of the management reviews. These documented information will act as proof of actions taken to comply with the requirements of the clause. So friends, this was all about clause 9, management review of ISO 45001-2018, occupational health and safety management system. Now, coming to clause 10, improvement. The clause 10 improvement has three subclauses, which are subclause 10.1 general, subclause 10.2 incident, nonconformity and corrective action, and subclause 10.3 continual improvement. So let us start with clause 10.1 general. The requirement of the clause states that the organization has to identify opportunities for improvement. Refer to clause 9 and implement necessary actions to achieve the intended outcomes of its occupational health and safety management system. Improvement can arise from corrective action, continual improvement, breakthrough change, innovation, and reorganization. Coming to subclause 10.2, incident, nonconformity, and corrective action. The clause 10.2 states that the organization is required to establish, implement, and maintain a process or processes including reporting, investigating, and taking action to determine and manage incidents and nonconformities. When an incident or a nonconformity occurs, the organization shall react in a timely manner to the incident or nonconformity and, as applicable, take action to control and correct it, deal with the consequences, evaluate with the participation of workers, refer to clause 5.4, and the involvement of other relevant interested parties. The need for corrective action to eliminate the root cause of the incident or nonconformity in order that it does not recur or occur elsewhere. By point 1. Investigating the incident or reviewing the nonconformity. Second, determining the cause of the incident or nonconformity. Third, determining if similar incidents have occurred, if nonconformities exist, or if they could potentially occur. Reviewing existing assessment of occupational health and safety risk and other risks as appropriate. Refer to clause 6.1. Determine and implement any action needed, including corrective action, in accordance with the hierarchy of controls. Refer to clause 8.1.2 and the management of change. Refer to clause 8.1.3. Assess occupational health and safety risks that relate to new or changed hazards prior to taking action. Review the effectiveness of any action taken, including corrective action. Make changes to the occupational health and management system if necessary. Corrective actions shall be taken keeping in mind the effects or potential effects of the incidents or nonconformities encountered. The organization must retain documented information as evidence of the nature of the incidents or nonconformities and any subsequent actions taken, the results of any action and corrective action, including their effectiveness. Organization shall communicate this documented information to relevant workers and, where they exist, worker representatives and other relevant interested parties. The clause under a note states that the reporting and investigation of incidents without undue delay can enable hazards to be eliminated and associated occupational health and safety risk to be minimized as soon as possible. When determining the root cause of an incident or nonconformity, the organization should use methods appropriate to the nature of the incident or nonconformity being analyzed. The focus of root cause analysis is prevention. This analysis can identify multiple contributory failures, including factors related to communication, competence, fatigue, equipment, or procedures. Coming to last clause of the standard, that is clause 10.3, continual improvement. The clause states that the organization is required to continually improve the suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness of the occupational health and safety management system by point A. Enhancing occupational health and safety performance. Point B. By promoting a culture that supports an occupational health and safety management system. Point C. By promoting the participation of workers in implementing actions for the continual improvement of the occupational health and safety management system. Point D. By communicating the relevant results of continual improvement to workers and, where they exist, workers' representatives. And where they exist, workers' representatives. Point E. By maintaining and retaining documented information as evidence of continual improvement. Examples of continual improvement issues include, but are not limited to, new technology, good practices, both internal and external to the organization, suggestions and recommendations from interested parties. It is not necessary to implement their suggestions, but the organization should listen to them. New knowledge and understanding of occupational health and safety related issues and new or improved materials. So friends, we have arrived at the end of clause 10 and with it at the end of the standard of ISO 45001-2018, Occupational Health and Safety Management System. Hope you have understood the requirements of the standard ISO 45001-2018. See you soon with another ISO standard. Till then, take care. Goodbye.